TSN's Motoring 95 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, the intelligent oil for longer engine life. And Midas, the way it should be.
You can bet that during the summer, there's racing action going on at some track every weekend in North America. And unlike the consumer car market, at races like this CASCAR event, the big three still have the game all to themselves, and they spend millions of dollars on racing. But let's not forget that manufacturers are in the business of selling cars, not racing them. So do they believe that they can influence consumers by their performance at the track every weekend? Well, we're here to find some answers to some of those questions. Race fans will tell you it's the noise, the speed, and the excitement that draws them to the track, and nobody would argue. But the racetrack also represents one of the world's largest corporate billboards. Everywhere you look, manufacturers are promoting their products, and it doesn't come cheap. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent each year to field just one race car. This CASCAR event in Delaware, Ontario marks the debut of Chrysler into the series with the new Dodge Avenger. For consumers out there, you look at the Avenger out here on the track today, and you look at the Avenger in the showroom. What are the similarities?
Well, the bodies look virtually the same. And other than that, not too much. It's a full race chassis. The Dodge Avenger has the Mopar 340 or 360 V8 engine and highly restricted by two-barrel carburetor, but they're putting out horsepower in the high 300 range.
So you really can't learn much about your Avenger by what happens here? You can't get any feedback? Or?
Well, not too much really, although obviously there's opportunities to work with engine development. And the same engine that's in the Avenger is basically the same engine that's in our Dodge trucks today, the Magnum V8.
Can you sell more Avengers if this car is successful here?
Well, I think the fans buy, and we don't do as much selling, but I think a lot of people are very loyal to manufacturers. There's a lot of loyal racing fans, and I think Chrysler will sell more Dodge Avengers if we're successful here at the racetrack.
By winning big races, can that sell a vehicle on Monday morning in the showroom?
Well, that's the old adage, that's for sure. What wins on Sunday sells on Monday, and I guess that's part of us being here as well, is to make sure that our name is out there. And also from my end of it, because I'm in the Good Ranch Service Plus area and AC Dalco marketing area, we look at it from an aftermarket point of view as well, hoping that people will bring their cars for service and buy our parts and in turn buy new General Motors cars.
Well, I've been in the business about 26 years. Ford, of course, has been involved in racing that entire time. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday, that's always been true over the years. I think now, though, we're involved in it for a number of reasons beyond just selling vehicles. It's to build camaraderie with the technicians that work at our dealerships, and the technological advances and knowledge that you gain, that's front and center with one of the reasons we're involved in so many types of racing worldwide. Race fans are probably the most brand conscious of any consumer. I mean, all you got to do is look in the stands, whether you're down at a race in the States or in Canada. Everybody's wearing a logo, a brand of a part or a service. And we're involved not only for the reasons I just mentioned, but we owe it to the fans up there. They're very loyal, and if they're Ford fans, we think we should be there participating on their behalf.
Well, I would think that that over a period of time, as a fan may decide to change allegiance, depending maybe on the driver. If the driver switches from a Ford over to a GM or vice versa, maybe they'll switch, but it's hard to say. It'd be interesting to do a poll with the fans and see exactly if it does matter.
We have mandatory pit stops this afternoon.
As a consumer, does it make any difference to you, or do you watch how the manufacturers do on the racetrack?
I definitely watch all the manufacturers, and I'm key to one brand. I'm a General Motors brand car.
Does it make any difference to you what they do on the racetrack?
Oh yeah, I'm always rooting for Chrysler.
Really?
Yeah. Really hope that it's a safe race for all the
I like Chrysler.
What are you driving? Are you rooting for that manufacturer today?
I drive a Ford.
So when you're driving home in your Ford and Ford wins the big race that afternoon, you feel a little better about your car?
Yeah, and then I feel like driving it more.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
On this edition of Test Drive, we take a look at the all-new Dodge Avenger. Now, the release of this vehicle and its sibling, the Chrysler Sebring, signals Chrysler's return to the sporty coupe marketplace.
The Avenger comes with a choice of two different engines, a very weak 140 horse 4 or a free-revving V6 that adds a lot more grunt, but it does so in a very peculiar manner. The 2.5-litre single overhead cam 24-valve V6 produces a reasonably healthy 155 horsepower and 161 pounds-feet of torque. The trouble is, though, the peak torque is produced way up the rev range at 4,400 RPM. This means that the Avenger takes its own sweet time until the engine hits about 3,000 RPM. The mid-range performance is acceptable, however, at the high end of the rev range, the engine produces far more noise than it does power. The result is very leisurely acceleration from about 95 kilometers an hour and up. What this car needs is the Cirrus version of the engine. Then the Avenger might perform the way it should do. The cameraman lamented that if the performance equaled the looks, we could have some serious fun. I can only echo this sentiment. Matched with the V6 is a 4-speed automatic transmission that comes complete with an on-off switch for the overdrive. The shifts are smooth and well coordinated for the most part. The weak point shows up quickly if you floor the gas pedal. Under these circumstances, the box drops down one too many gears, causing the engine to quite literally scream. Finally, when the transmission does shift up into the right gear, the car starts to move along. It is this peculiar trait that accounts for much of the lackluster performance offered by the engine in the high range. The ES tested here features a fully independent suspension that includes a handling package. As well as beefing up the spring rates, this package adds a mammoth set of Goodyear Eagles. The result is more than satisfactory. The Avenger flew through the pylon test despite the damp conditions. Understeer is mild and body roll next to non-existent. The excellence displayed on the skid pad continues out on the open road. The ride is composed and compliant, delivering a degree of comfort simply not expected. Helping the overall feel of the car is a speed-sensitive power steering setup that offers just the right amount of assist. At slow speeds you can spin the wheel with your finger. At higher speeds the system firms up to ensure the requisite level of feedback. In short, a job very well done. The up-level ES version of the Avenger boasts a great set of brakes. There are discs at all 4 corners plus anti-lock. During the brake test, the Avenger required 112 feet to stop from 80 kilometers an hour. The pedal is easily modulated and the ABS minds its own business until absolutely necessary. Then when it does intervene, it does so very effectively.
The trunk on the Avenger has been well thought through, with one exception. It's roomy, it features 60/40 split folding rear seats which can be locked in the upright position. You can override the interior remote with this little button. That means the only way into the trunk is with the key. That keeps your valuables nice and safe. So what's the exception? Well, you'd better be very careful when you load anything into the back of this vehicle. The deck lid sits at eye level and it's only too willing to take a chunk out of your forehead if you're not careful.
Inside, the Avenger ES comes with a complete complement of comfort and convenience items. You'll find power locks, windows and mirrors, plus cruise control and a complete set of analog gauges that includes an oil pressure gauge. The front seats are nicely shaped, offering plenty of support and comfort. A nice feature on the driver's seat is the memory position that allows you to return the seat back to its original position after it has been tilted forward.
Unlike many other coupes, the rear environment of the Avenger is actually quite spacious. There's adequate headroom and reasonable legroom. That said, like any other coupe, this thing is next to impossible to get in from the driver's side and not that much easier from the passenger side. The other thing I noticed back here, the front passengers get a very nice set of leather seats. Those relegated to the rear seats, you'll have to put up with cheap old plastic. From an ergonomic perspective, the Avenger fares reasonably well with all the major controls falling readily to hand. The exception is the radio. It sits low down in the dash and is partially blocked from the driver by the shifter. On the safety front, the Avenger comes complete with anti-lock brakes, dual airbags and adjustable upper seatbelt anchors. Well, that's it for this edition of Test Drive. You know, the Avenger is really a very nice car. It's a great looker, it's got reasonable interior room, and you know, it handles very nicely too. The only problem is it's all show and virtually no go.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns Fender Flares. You'll find these primarily on sport utility vehicles, and over the years sport utilities have been seeing ever-increasing tire sizes to the point where manufacturers have had to add some pretty extensive flares around the fenders. This particular vehicle has pretty small ones, but on many of today's vehicles like Pathfinders, for example, some huge flares in this area. They can be an asset to your vehicle's appearance, but they can also be a liability if you don't know how to give them the right TLC. So you can see around this rear wheel opening, everything looks to be just fine. But as we move forward, you're going to see pretty extensive rust around this wheelhouse opening that's primarily caused as a result of dirt getting down behind this fender flare. What you've got to do with these is periodically remove them, or at the very least make sure that you flex them outboard a little bit and clean this crevice between the body and the flare, because it's a catch-all for grit. Rubs the paint off the body and it keeps moisture trapped in there, and eventually it greatly accelerates corrosion. What you do after you've cleaned that area is get yourself a can of rust repellent. All the manufacturers of rust repellent make an aerosol can available. Just spritz it down in that crevice and let it soak in and wipe off the excess. Do that several times per year and it will likely prevent this unsightly corrosion from ever occurring. That's your Midas tip of the week.
We're about halfway through this 200-lap CASCAR event, and you know, it's the usual thing at the end of a race, of course, to interview the winning driver. But for our purposes, I think we'll interview a rep from the winning manufacturer, see if today's performance might sell a few more cars come Monday morning in the showroom. Let's now leave the track and head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
You know, there's literally dozens and dozens of places where the coolant from your vehicle's cooling system could possibly leak out as a result of faulty parts. But by far one of the most common sources of cooling system leakage is a faulty water pump. That's what we want to talk about today. And depending on the make, model, and year of your vehicle, that replacing of the water pump could be anything from an easy do-it-yourselfer job in the driveway to something that requires maybe a tow-in and the assistance of a professional mechanic, because believe me, on some of today's cars, the labor involved in getting these water pumps out can be quite extensive and therefore a quite expensive job. But let's have a look at this one this week. This is a pretty easy one to do and you'll get a good idea of just how it works. Now the vehicle we're using for our demonstration today is an 87 Chev Blazer sport utility truck, and it gives you, because it has a removable upper shroud, we can get a real good look at the water pump. Now I've got to be careful, of course, because we've got a lot of moving parts here, but just down there where I'm pointing is the location of the water pump, and you can see it being turned via that pulley I'm pointing to, and the fan blades as well. Now shut her off. Okay, now the water pump is located right in here, and its job is to draw coolant through the lower rad hose. Okay, its intake is the lower rad hose and the radiator, takes that coolant in through the lower rad hose, and it circulates it or pushes it back through the engine block on this 2.8 liter V6 engine. It's pushing it down either side of the cylinder banks, okay? 3 cylinders on either side of this engine. And what it does is it circulates the coolant all around the water jackets, around the pistons and cylinder liners on each side of that V6 engine. Pushes it all the way to the back of the block, then it comes up through a couple of transfer ports into the back of the cylinder head, then it flows forward through the cylinder head till it gets roughly up to this location, transfers into the intake manifold right about here, and collects right here in this location where the vehicle's thermostat is located. Now once the engine reaches 195 degrees coolant temperature, the thermostat will open, allowing the coolant to be pushed. Remember, the water pump's pushing it or circulating it. It's going to push it out through that open thermostat, out through the upper rad hose, and into the radiator to be cooled. And it's the job of the water pump to provide sufficient circulation so that we don't get any uneven heating or hot spots in that engine as it's coming up to temperature. And of course, once it reaches that 195 degrees, the water pump completely circulates the coolant through the entire cooling system, and the rad takes away that heat. Now, the water pump on this vehicle is located right here, just forward of this gasketed surface. You can see 3 of the fasteners that attach the water pump securely to the timing cover. Water pump's made of cast aluminum in this particular application, and that's the pulley that drives the water pump via this multi-ribbed or serpentine type belt. And on the front of the water pump, we've got a clutch-driven fan. It's driven by a viscous clutch, and you can see the fan blades right here. And by the way, the fan can sometimes be responsible for premature failure of a water pump. For example, if you had a blade that was bent, broken, or damaged, it would cause this fan to vibrate excessively at high speed, and that would quickly damage the bearing in the water pump, and it could even cause the shaft to fracture and the pump to come apart completely. Now, other things that can cause premature water pump failure are failure of the owner to change the coolant, because one of the properties of your engine coolant, of course, is an additive to lubricate the seals in the water pump. So if your coolant is in there for more than 2 or 3 years' time and it gets worn out, it can cause premature failure of the pump. Now, while the purpose of the water pump hasn't changed over the years, obviously its whole purpose in life is to circulate the coolant in the cooling system. The size, shape, and configuration of the pumps over the years has changed drastically. There's a pump used in the 70s and 80s, and even on some current Chevrolet vehicles like pickup trucks. A heavy cast iron pump is a really stout unit, but that's about 14 or 15 pounds. And in this case, you can see that there's some threaded mounting holes here, and the water pump actually acts as a mounting base for other accessories like the alternator and power steering. And up here where you see these 4 threaded holes, you've got a large steel fan bolted on there with a fan clutch and a pulley to drive the pump. Now, here's the pump that's going to actually go on this Chevy Blazer, the 87. And in this case, the pump material has been changed from cast iron on this older pump to aluminum now, and the pump's only about 4 or 5 pounds now. Still has a steel shaft with a threaded 4 threaded holes here at the front to mount the pulley and the fan blades, okay? And you can see on the back side of this pump the impeller and a spigot here where one of the heater hoses goes on. That's the intake port for the pump there where the coolant comes in through the lower rad hose, and these are the 2 outlet ports where it's going to push that coolant down either side of the engine. Now, many of today's front-wheel drive cars have a tiny little pump, something like this one, aluminum body. This one only weighs a pound or 2. You can get a real good look at the impeller on the back side of the pump. And the interesting thing about this pump is that this one is belt driven but doesn't have any fan blades attached to it. And it's also driven by the engine's timing belt. That's the rubber cogged belt that drives the camshaft in an overhead cam engine. Now, there's a number of things, of course, that can cause a water pump to fail. The bearing up here in the neck of the pump can get noisy or even seize up and stop the pump completely. That's fairly rare. The shaft can break as a result of imbalance in the fan blades, as I mentioned earlier. Bent or broken fan blades can cause that. But by far the most likely cause of a problem in a water pump is failure of that seal located down here in the back of the pump. When the seal fails, you get a little leakage or a trickle of coolant coming out this weep hole, and then it trickles down and drops off the vehicle somewhere and puddles on the ground. The idea of this weep hole is to let the coolant escape before it gets to the bearing so the pump never actually seizes up. But if you ever notice a trickle of coolant underneath your vehicle or any puddling or ponding of coolant, make sure that you don't ignore that. At the first possible opportunity, when the engine's cool, of course, verify that the coolant level in the radiator is sufficient. It's likely going to be down somewhat. Top it up and get that vehicle in, have it properly checked out, because there's a good chance that you need a new water pump. If you get it on there soon enough before the engine overheats, you'll save costly repairs. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 95.
Off-Road Corner with Cam McRae, brought to you by Land Rover, makers of Range Rover, Discovery, and Defender.
This week on the Off-Road Corner, we're going to talk about water crossings. Splashing through the water can be a lot of fun, but crossing the water can be one of the most treacherous endeavors you'll ever attempt off-roading. Water splashing up underneath the vehicle can go right into the engine, sometimes causing terminal damage. And getting stuck in the middle of the river is a disaster. But there is a way to get across, and we're going to tell you how to do it. You come up to the side of the river or the pond and start in slowly. Maintain a good level speed right across, forming a bow wave that doesn't splash up too high. Keep your speed constant, maintain right across, and come out the other side. With any luck, you'll be clean, free, no damage, and you'll get across with no trouble at all. Your Land Rover Canada Tread Lightly tip of the week. Many of Canada's watercourses are very important fish habitat and strictly off limits to four-wheel drive vehicles. Your vehicle could be impounded or you could face a stiff fine. So always check with the local authorities before you try any water crossing. For the Off-Road Corner, I'm Cam McRae.
Maybe for the chairman of BMW, this should be the ultimate driving experience. Back in a moment on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
You may have heard about the Mclaren F1. This is an ultra-exotic, high-performance sports car being built by the same people as run the McLaren Formula One racing team. I'll tell you, this car is star-crossed. During its development stages, an engineer was doing some high-temperature testing in the Namibian desert in southern Africa. He looked down at his telemetry, and when he looked back up, there was a pickup truck with about 47 locals coming straight at him. He cranked the wheel to the right to avoid the crash, but did endos at 155 miles an hour. When the dust had cleared, he was about the biggest piece of the car left, but thanks to its carbon fiber construction and a 5-point safety harness he was wearing, he wasn't hurt. That's one. A little bit later, a McLaren employee was taking an F1 to a London auto show. He lost control in a roundabout and smashed into a steel post, just about ripped the rear half of the car right off. That's two. But wait, there's more. Now, BMW has done a 6-liter V12 engine specifically for this car. So when the chairman of BMW, Bernd Pischetsrieder, asked McLaren for a test drive, well, they could hardly say no. So Herr Pischetsrieder took his wife and another friend out for a little boot. Now, I don't know whether he sneezed or blinked or whatever, but next thing you know, Herr Pischetsrieder's doing some high-speed farming at about 140 miles an hour. All three were pretty badly banged up, but the worst injury was to Mr. Pischetsrieder's pride. Now, I don't know about you, but my mommy always told me, don't borrow things, don't loan things. You just never know what's going to happen to them. I'll bet you the folks at McLaren had taken that advice. Maybe they should just build the cars and sell them. Don't drive them, and don't let their friends drive them. Or better still, maybe they should just stick to something a little more their own speed. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, this CASCAR event is over, and Kerry Mix in the Midas car has won it driving a Monte Carlo. And of course, earlier we were asking manufacturers if a performance at the track, a good performance, can mean selling more cars Monday morning. They think so. So how about the advertisers? In this case, of course, it's Midas with the winning car. And with me from Midas, the Director of Advertising and Promotion, Richard Miller. And Richard, I know you're thrilled about winning the race, but can you turn this into business? Can you get more people in Midas shops across the country?
Well, as the aftermarket leader in undercar service, one of the things that we do is suspension, steering, and brakes. And without a real superior knowledge, you can't win a race. And we at Midas are very involved, as you're aware, in this sport. And it gives us a chance to demonstrate firsthand how well we know what goes underneath the car in terms of suspension and steering and brakes.
Hopefully get more customers in.
You bet.
All right, so there you go. It's all over here from the CASCAR event. The winning car again, Kerry Mix in the Midas 02 car, and that is it for this week. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who race them and drive them.
TSN's Motoring 95 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, the intelligent oil for longer engine life. And Midas, the way it should be.